are you going to be drawn to more of those kind of themes in future work because of Motorcycle Diaries and On the Road? Because it seems like your previous work, was very varied, including the television stuff. But now, with the acclaim for Motorcycle Diaries and taking on something as high profile as On the Road, do you have an appetite for more political, drama?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like it to mean something. Whatever it is I do, I'd like it to mean more than a paycheck or more than a fun opening night party. So, I mean, the projects I've taken on since then, one was Welcome to America, which is the piece Roland Emmerich hired me to write, which is based on a New York Times article called The Girls Next Door, which is about sexual slavery around the world and how these girls are kidnapped or, tricked into these horrible conditions and then kept in bondage, literally, and offered to men for sex. And they're not prostitutes because they have absolutely no independence whatsoever. They don't walk the streets. They're kept in locked rooms. Some of them are chained to their beds, and it's a horrible, horrible existence. And so that drew me because I thought, wow, what can film do? Film can raise consciousness. Film can point the finger at something unknown. There's so many things film can do. It can redeem a life, if it's done right. So I really felt this was something I really wanted to do. And there's another project that I'm working on at DreamWorks called The State Boys Rebellion, which is a book written several years ago about the eugenics movement in the United States. The backstory is, there are certain people in the United States who really felt that the general population was too polluted with criminals, with people who aren't very smart, and that these people need to be segregated for the greater good of society. So these state schools were created, and kids all over the country were administered IQ tests. And if they scored below a certain number, they were, in some cases, forcibly taken from their families and put in these schools where they were sterilized. And the whole idea is that they wouldn't let these kids, populate. So, this particular book is about 4 boys in one state school in Massachusetts. And it's amazing.
What's the time period?
The time period is, he goes in around 1948, which is ironic because that's the exact same year as the On the Road story. And we follow this one kid named Fred Boyce from the time he's admitted to the time he leaves. And, true story, I met Fred. He's still alive, lives in Massachusetts, only a few miles from the school itself where he was captive. And these kids were, subject to sexual abuse, you name it, slave labor. At one point, they were, several of the boys were sort of segregated from the rest of the group. And they were told by the school administrator, you guys are the smartest boys in this school. You guys are so smart, we're going to start a science club for you, and you're going to be in our science club. And the boys were so excited. And so for months, they were fed oatmeal that was given to them by Quaker Oats. And the oatmeal, as the boys found out years later, was radioactive. And they completely had no idea. And because these were expendable kids, many of them were orphans, many of them were poor, nobody was going to make a fuss over what happens to them. They thought they can get away with it. And years later, Fred Boyce and the other science club members sued Massachusetts, sued MIT, and sued Quaker Oats and won a large settlement. So to me, that's a great story. That is political, it's emotional, it's got everything.
And probably not as well known as it should be.
Yeah, not well known. I mean, when you say eugenics movement, most people don't know. They think of Hitler, but Hitler in a lot of ways learned his eugenics from the United States.
And you're giving voice to these stories.
Yeah. And the sad thing is that Fred, who's in his 60s, is dying of cancer right now, and we're hoping. When I talk to him every couple of weeks, he goes, "Do you think I'll be alive when the movie happens?" And we're trying to get this thing done.
We're hoping that
happens. As quickly as possible.
Now, with Motorcycle Diaries and even On the Road and the other projects you mentioned, how important is it to you to visit the locations or kind of like almost like mentally scout, the settings for for the screenplays themselves, because they're all kind of based on real life things.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you do that before you shot Motorcycle, or before you wrote Motorcycle Diaries? Did you go?
No, I did it all backwards. I wrote it first, and then went down to Argentina when Walter was in pre-production, and saw Argentina for the first time after I wrote about it.
I never would have guessed that, reading the screenplay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I researched it as much as I could without traveling, and to get the feel of it. And fortunately, or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, parts of South America have not changed since Che's time. They simply have not moved on. So it wasn't that hard for Walter, for instance, to find the locations to match the tone of the original. With On the Road, I've traveled through the United States a lot, so I didn't need to do that. Walter, on the other hand, hasn't. And he's actually embarked on several cross-country drives.
Oh, so it's like a flip-flop a little bit of Motorcycle Diaries?
Yeah, in a way.
Where he knew the terrain and you had to learn it. Now you knew the terrain, he has to learn it.
And I've been to a lot of the places mentioned in the book. And Walter, because he's Brazilian, just hasn't. And in a way, somebody asked me recently whether, is it cool or kosher that, a Puerto Rican screenwriter and a Brazilian director are engaging with On the Road? And I think the answer to that is yes, because I think there's something about...
It's about a spirit.
It's something about having an outsider's eye that actually I think allows you to see what an insider can't see.
I thought the same thing about The Ice Storm. I thought Ang Lee could make that movie about America much better than an American director.
I totally agree. And Brokeback, I think he did. Yeah.
On the State Boys Rebellion and the slavery project, did you have to do a lot of research for each of those, and did you travel to any of the locations that those stories are set in?
Yeah. For the slavery one, I did a lot of research. I went to Mexico.
That feels like it can be overbearing too, where you could cross the line from writer to just citizen with a conscience, and
right.
It seems like a dark world to traverse.
It is, and there's so many dangers. For instance, you don't want to be a voyeur. You don't want to enrich yourself on the misery of these girls. And what do you do when you're faced with somebody? You rescue them. What do you do?
Did you rescue anyone?
I didn't rescue anyone, no, unfortunately. But I did meet a lot. I went to Mexico City and met a lot of prostitutes and interviewed them. Went to a women's shelter that was run by a former prostitute herself, where they kept a lot of girls who were ex-prostitutes, ex-sex slaves, and interviewed a bunch of those girls. And really sort of learned that the screenplay will not be 1/100th as horrible as the real stories are. I mean,
right.
Some of the things these girls have lived through who are 9 and 10 years old you can't imagine.
So it's really, you take the job on yourself to just shine a light on the problem, but also, put it into a story that can be conveyed.
Yeah, you have to humanize it for people because,
because it's unimaginable to most people.
Right. And the bad side, the flip side is you're creating a film that's kiddie porn. You're creating a film about girls having sex when they're, 8 or 9 years old. That's going to be exciting to, a pedophile. You don't want to make that kind of movie,
So you have to stay true to the context, but not be exploitative.
Exactly, and still be honest. And that's the trick, because sex, definitely happened, rape definitely happened, and you can't goof around with that. You really have to go for it. So it's a tremendously fine line. And the young director who directed that film, the little I've seen looks really, really good. His dailies are very good.
Do you work on several projects at the same time, or you kind of just go one at a time?
No, I wish I could work on one at a time, but I don't. I'm working on a play right now, and I'm working on a couple of screenplays, and actually started writing a novel, and so there's always a lot to do.
Do you think that kind of prolific nature comes from your background in playwriting and the other formats, and just always having something going?
I think it comes from my dad in a way, because he, my dad was like, I don't know if you remember the Saturday Night Live skits of the Dominican immigrants who had 4 jobs.
Yes, yeah.
That was my dad. He always had tons of jobs, and so I always looked upon work with a very unromantic view. And I approach my writing in a way like a working class guy would, blue collar guy. This is my job. It's not romantic. It's not mystical. It is a job, and I'm going to do my best at it. And you know, I don't think you can work too hard. You know, I mean, you can,
right.
And people, you know, keel over and die from that. But you know, for me, hard work is where it's at.
I guess each one represents its own challenge, but do you have particular ease with one format versus another?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think, you know, I find theater natural to me, you know, and one of the things, I've taught screenwriting and playwriting. One thing I tell my students is that, you know, you write a play with your ears and a movie with your eyes. And, you know, it's become a matter of training my eyes to be as good as my ears.
So can you teach screenwriting? I mean, do you think it's something that someone can learn, or does it have to be an ingrown talent?
I don't think you can teach talent.
Sure.
I think you can teach discipline, and you can teach methods. But you know, it's like teaching someone to have a sense of humor. Mm-hmm. I don't think it can be done. You can teach someone how a joke works, but you're not going to make them funny.
Right.
But I think you can learn good habits and good skills.
Would you recommend schooling for aspiring screenwriters or writers?
I would not. I don't know if I would recommend school, like graduate school, for playwrights. And I've taught some graduate school programs, and the problem is, after 3 years of graduate school, these writers come out with such huge debts that they end up working on sitcoms in order to pay for their debts. You know. But I would recommend some kind of schooling for screenwriters, just because the mechanics are not, to me at least, they're not natural, and you really have to sort of learn them.
Are there classic films that you kind of grew up with that are beloved, you know, that kind of inspired you all along the way?
You know, some of the films from the 70s I find really inspiring. You know, I loved Midnight Cowboy, for instance, and Taxi Driver, those kinds of films. You know, Like Water for Chocolate, I thought was a great film. I just saw a film just 2 nights ago called Somersault, which I thought was wonderful little film. So yeah.
So film continues to inspire you.
Oh yeah, yeah, and surprise me. Like sometimes you think you've seen it all, you know, and there's no new territory to go to, and then someone will do something amazing.
Right. You're very conscious of trying to do something original or something that hasn't been done before when you're thinking about projects to take on?
Well, yeah. I mean, both Welcome to America and The State Boys. When I said, when I was looking at those projects, I did say to myself, I don't see anyone else doing this. Not that anyone else couldn't. A lot of people could, but no one else is tackling it right now. And
some of the other things you're working on, are they of lighter content? You're coming off this, you know, really serious subject matter.
Yeah.
Do you ever find the need just for your own, you know, kind of like, you know, well-being to move off darker material and go to lighter material?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, one of the things I'm working on now is I did an adaptation of a play of mine called Cloud Tectonics into a screenplay called Celestina. And it's a very simple love story with a magical component. You know, it's about a girl who makes time slow down wherever she goes. And she's, for instance, been pregnant for 2 years and stuff like that. And she meets a guy who loads luggage at LAX. And, you know, sort of an accidental meeting, and they fall in love. It's not that it's light, it's just very romantic.
And it sounds like it has a touch of magic realism.
Very much so, yeah. Yeah, very much so. You know, one of the things I was able to do was study with Gabriel Garcia Marquez in 1989 at Sundance.
Was that just an incredible experience?
That was. He was really cool. He was very down to earth, reminded me a lot of my grandfather, very earthy, and loved dirty jokes, you know.
What was the best or overriding lesson you took away from your experience with him?
Well, he set up his work, and he can be very tongue-in-cheek. You can't really take his word literally, but what he said is that everything he writes, in a way, is a function of journalism. And he started off as a journalist. That there is nothing, in his words, metaphoric or symbolic about anything that he's written, that it's all something that has happened in the real world. And he told once a story when he was in Bogota. He was hailing a taxi, and he got into the taxi, and in his country, you know, he's a superstar. So the cab driver recognized him and says, "You're Garcia Marquez, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes." And the guy pulled the car over and turned to him and said, "Why is it that you water down reality? Why don't you really tell it like it is? You know it's crazier in life than it is in your books." And, you know, there's a feeling that, you know...
He pulled the car over to tell him that?
Yeah. So I love the idea of him being, you know, lectured...
Offended by a
But, you know, the whole idea is that life itself is so incredible and so full of mystery and so full of the unexpected that sometimes fiction has a hard time keeping up.
Do you think it's really important for a writer to be politically aware of kind of the times they're living in?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think, virtually nothing happens out of context. What we're doing, maybe in 10 years people will look back on things that are written today and say, yeah, these were written during the Bush years. And you can tell because of X, Y, Z, that conscious or not, we do absorb,
The times we're living in.
Yeah.
Why do you think, aside from the obvious, like the 70s seem to always be referred to as a golden era in terms of movies? How much of that do you think is due to the writing of the period?
Yeah, I think the writing was really strong. I think it had to do with a willingness to look at the darkest things of human experience and not to give the audience a happy ending and not to hold the audience's hand and not to baby an audience, to really let ambiguity happen, give us an ending that could be a happy or a sad ending depending on how you look at it. In a way that time period seems to celebrate that ambiguity. And, the anti-heroes were fascinating and flawed and hard to tell from the real heroes, Prince of the City is a movie that comes to mind where I didn't know who was who after a while, and I like that. I like not knowing. And
that
I
was
think,
J. Preston Allen screenplay, right?
Right, yeah. And I think these days we're in a culture where it seems that we're told as screenwriters and filmmakers that the audience wants clarity, that the audience wants to know who to root for and how to respond. And I don't know if I believe that, I think the audience wants to be shaken up, in a deep and fundamental way. And I think the fact that people are not going to the movies as much has to do with the quality of the work that we're creating. And I don't see that sense of shaking you up the way, for instance, I don't know, a good rock concert shakes you up, or what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That's what films should be doing.
Has there been a project of yours that fits that bill that you haven't gotten made in Hollywood because of that problem that you're describing?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, no.
Good. Do you think you'll move into directing?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm in the process now. We're raising money for a film that I wrote based on my plays, Cloud Tectonics, which I mentioned earlier, and I will be directing for the first time.
How are you approaching that?
There's a lot of fear, I think, a lot of respect. One of the great things about having worked with Walter is he is very keen on first-time directors and has mentored a few. For instance, the director of City of God. I came to him with this project, and he loved the screenplay and loved the vision of it, and agreed to sort of be the godfather of it. So that's been really helpful, and he's been a great mentor, and we've talked endlessly about lenses and cameras and crews and things like that, which I know nothing about. So I feel at least kind of protected in a way, and kind of mentored in that. Otherwise, I am nervous. The one thing I know I do bring to the experience is 20 some odd years in the theater, where I've worked with actors. I know actors. I love actors. I know how to speak their language. I think I know how to get a good performance out of an actor. So that part of it doesn't worry me. And being a writer, I know how to tell a story. And I think it's the technical things that kind of overwhelm me, or that mystify me to some degree.
But as far as your approach to writing, it doesn't really change much in terms of just how you approach the script, the fact that you're directing.
Yeah, in a way, though, I was far more disciplined in my script than I would have been on someone else's script, where I figured, okay, they'll solve it. And in this, I had to write the things and realize, oh my God, I've got to solve it.
Right.
So, that's a different kind of head, I think.
So how important is it to have a kind of a mentor like Walter Salles on your first feature?
Wonderful. I mean, really, really great, and very useful. So for instance, we've gotten Antonio Banderas to agree to do the film, and that came largely through Walter's connections. His DP on Dark Water, Afonso Beato, is a wonderful guy, and through Walter I met Afonso, and he loved the script, and we're going to work together. And so in bringing in the kinds of people that Walter respects, I couldn't have done it without him. There's no way. So
no conflicts yet between the director side of you telling the writer side of you to make changes or cuts, or?
No, it's so much easier to work for yourself in a way. I actually I'm more difficult on myself than other directors have been on me, I think.
Aside from Walter, are there any obvious filmmaking influences?
Not really. No. I would say, Norman Lear, when I first started out writing for TV, was a big influence.
In what way?
Well, just because I love Norman. He's a great guy. I saw him not long ago. There aren't that many men like him.
Right.
He's an old school guy.
He really pioneered issues of race on mainstream television.
How could you not want to work for a guy like that? And when we were putting together AKA Pablo, it's about a Chicano family in East LA. No one was doing that on television. He cast a very big cast, though I did tell him at one point, I said, Norman, big families are a cliche. But he said he wanted a big cast, so we got one. And, he takes risks, and he hired me, 26-year-old with no TV experience, one play under my belt, and, gave me my first shot.
That's great. We've got a little screenwriting exercise prepared for you. Frederick, the tray, please. Frederick here has an object on this tray. We know nothing about it. Frederick knows nothing about it. We're going to reveal it to you for the first time, chosen by random. Your job is to make up a story. Tell me what the story is, and then tell me why you picked this particular story.
Okay.
Let him have it.
Your object, sir.
Thank you. Look at that lovely cat. Right. Let's see. There was once a kid who found a little cat. The cat was sitting on top of a wheel of a Volkswagen, right under the fender. The kid is walking by with his parents and hears a sound and says, "What is that?" And looks under the wheel of the Volkswagen, finds his little cat, takes it home. And the cat climbs on everything, and the kid calls the cat Climber. And Climber is getting into everything that they have at the house, getting into the goldfish, is getting into the baby's crib, is getting into the underwear drawer. And the parents decide, you know what, I think it's time to put Climber outside. And the kid goes, no, it's dangerous out there. There's coyotes and things. And the parents go, no, Climber's not very house trained, and it's time for Climber to hit the road. So they put a little collar on Climber, and Climber goes out to the backyard and plays. And at night, the kid brings the Climber back into the house. And one night, the kid falls in front of the TV and forgets to bring Climber in. Climber spends the night outside. Our little boy's asleep, and he doesn't hear the sound of the coyotes that are circling the neighborhood. And poor Climber gets it.
Aww.
Yes, I'm afraid to say. And the next day, the kid wakes up and says, where's Climber? The parents look at each other really upset. And they keep the kid inside, and the parents go out in the backyard to look for Climber. And they find nothing but a collar and some hair. And they conclude that it's the coyotes. And the kid doesn't find out about this for a long time. And one day, they go to an old antique store, and this particular cat is sitting there. And it looks exactly like Climber. And they give it to the kid, and they say, look, Climber's gone to a better place, and he is now immortal in this particular little stuffed animal. And he loves you like Climber did. He'll talk to you at night, and every night as the kid goes to bed, this particular little thing comes to life and sits in the bed with the little boy and cuddles with him. And when he wakes up the next morning, it's this again. And that's the end of the story.
Aw, yay. That manages to be touching and a poignant parable of responsibility. That was excellent. How'd you come upon that, upon instantaneous viewing?
I don't know. I mean, I had a cat.
Now I can't have it stare at me. I feel bad.
I know.
I want him to come to life.
This is a good magical. This is a very magical thing. No, I don't know. It's just.
I mean, there's so much in that. There's the parent's responsibility to the kid. There's the kid's responsibility to the cat. There's the.
I know. Yeah, and the touch of magic at the end.
No, that weaves in some of the elements we've been talking about in your work, issues of responsibility and also magic realism.
Right.
We talked about it. Did those thoughts just come naturally to you?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about magic realism that you know, is part of the genre, I guess, is the idea that within any ordinary object there exists the potential for something magical to happen.
And I imagine the kid learns something about his parents' duplicity once the cat turns into...
Yeah, that's probably part 2 of the story, and then he kills his parents or something.
Well, that was a beautiful story.